I'm Susan Steinberg, president of the Stuyvesant Town Peter Cooper Village Tenants Association, and I welcome you to our Leases 123 webinar. Our panelists today include our elected representative, State Senator Kristen Gonzalez, our Assembly member, Harvey Epstein, our Councilman, Keith Powers, Tim Collins of Collin Dopkins Miller, our attorney, and our Vice President of External Affairs, Ann Greenberg. I'd like to acknowledge that we've also been joined by board members Lynn Janofsky and Kirsten Adel, and I will announce if more come on. I'd also like to give a special thanks to Sandro Sherrod, who is the technological and technical genius who powers all of our webinars. Well, whether you are a long-term rent-stabilized tenant, a post-Roberts tenant, or a lottery tenant, leases are complicated, and it really takes a lot of effort and commitment to read through all the small print and know all the ins and outs. So this is why we're putting on this webinar, because we want you to have some answers to the many questions that you have asked us. Tim Collins will spend the bulk of the meeting providing a summary of rent stabilization status and answering the questions you've submitted. He will also give an overview of where our latest rounds of major capital improvements are. Before that, however, our electeds will briefly address Albany and city impacts on us, and Ann Greenberg will speak about a citywide rent freeze campaign. Many of you are extremely interested in a rent freeze and may have actually signed a rent freeze petition that we had on the streets a few weeks ago. A final point before I turn the meeting over to Kristen Gonzalez. There were more questions than we actually have time for. We're going to try to answer as many as we can, but if we go over the hour that we have allotted, we will answer them and email the participants who have registered for this webinar. We also requested that people do not ask us quality of life questions. Of course, many of you have, but that's okay. We're going to save them and very seriously consider having a future webinar where we deal only with quality of life issues. And without more ado, I am turning the meeting over to Senator Gonzalez.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much, Susan. Thank you, Sandro, and everyone else who helped put this together. It is so good to be here. My name, for those who this may be the first time you're seeing me, my name is Kristen. I'm your state senator. I am chair of the Elections Committee and the Internet and Technology Committee in the Senate. And today I'm going to be focusing on our budget update. So as many of you know, we are in the process of creating and passing the state budget. And where we're at is we are negotiating between the Senate, the Assembly, and the governor's office what that final budget will be. And today, what I want to focus on is what our office has contributed to the Senate's position on the executive budget and what we are trying to push in response to the federal administration's cuts. So I know we have a hard 5-minute cap. We're happy to circulate more information after the meeting. And then, of course, happy to take questions at the very end of the meeting. So jumping right into it for the sake of time, our office focused on a few key priorities, including our tax on noise from non-essential helicopter and seaplane flights bill to discourage the number of helicopter and seaplane flights we are seeing along the East River. We also contributed to the Senate's position the privacy bill on Omni. Many of you might have seen in the news that Omni was unfortunately being used to track certain students. So we wrote a bill and got that in the Senate's position, as well as our statewide healthcare assessment bill. This bill was introduced in response to what is happening with Mount Sinai Beth Israel. It is a requirement for the state Department of Health to create impact assessments and assessments of this strain put on nearby hospitals when there is a hospital closure. And finally, our e-bike legislation, which would require anyone who rents, or operates a moped or e-bike to be informed of the rules of the road. This is the very least. Obviously, there are more proposals on top of that, but these are the bills that our office authored and introduced into the Senate One House. With that, I want to turn to a comparison for all of you by issue area on what the federal government has recommended through their Republican budget resolution versus what the Senate One House positions are in response. So starting with Medicaid and healthcare spending, the Republican budget resolution promised $880 billion of cuts over the next 10 years, much of which will be in cuts to Medicaid programs. What we are trying to negotiate right now is in investing an additional $1.5 billion in healthcare funding, specifically making sure our hospitals, nursing homes, and community health centers are funded to support the patients they serve. We also included an additional $2.5 billion in operating aid for financially distressed hospitals to make sure their doors stay open. And we expand Medicaid coverage and protections for vulnerable populations. Of course, we will update you once the final budget is passed on all of these so you all know what exactly the final language and numbers are. The next issue area, of course, is education, which is top of mind, I know, for many of you. The Republican budget resolution projects $300 billion in cuts to education, which could lead to New York specifically losing $5.5 billion in education funding. DOGE also, of course, has plans to dismantle and has already worked towards dismantling the Department of Education. So in response, we are proposing an increase of foundation aid funding by $1.8 billion over the last year to a total of $26.7 billion, ensuring our schools are funded with the resources they need. And we add over $20 million in funding to support teachers with training and resources. Finally, we expand access to universal pre-K with $150 million. Next, I'm going to cover transportation. Obviously, there were cuts of $2 billion in the Republican proposed budget. In our Senate position, we have $3.6 billion for core highway funding, $5.2 billion for non-MTA public transportation systems. And we are also in the process of making sure our public transit system, the MTA, is fully funded as we work through the MTA capital plan. And that will certainly keep you all updated on as well. I just very quickly, going into energy and environment. This is another area the Trump administration is very enthusiastic about cutting. A few notable things: the EPA plans to terminate $20 billion in contracts related to the Inflation Reduction Act, specifically $14 billion in National Climate Investment Fund or National Green Bank, and $6 billion to the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator Program. A lot of that money was coming to New York. In our what we are trying to negotiate through the budget, and our position is putting $1 billion in the climate investment account to fund critical green infrastructure projects and resiliency projects across New York State, investing $200 million in clean water funding, including $100 million for lead service line replacements. I think we've been seeing a lot about lead pipes in the news recently, so this is certainly being responsive to that. And $100 million for the Safe Water Infrastructure Action Plan. We're also investing $500 million in the Environmental Protection Fund, which supports projects related to climate change mitigation and adaptation. Finally, I'm going to go into housing, which I know is the topic for today. The Republican budget cuts rent subsidies for low-income and working Americans by more than $700 million, putting 32,000 households at risk of eviction. It also provides $168 million less than what is needed to maintain homeless services across 400 communities nationally. So in our proposal in the budget, we allocate $250 million to the Housing Access Voucher Program to provide rental assistance for New Yorkers at risk of eviction. We also provide $50 million for shelter arrears eviction, and we have $219 million for the Homeless Housing Assistance Program. I think it's really notable that we have the Housing Access Voucher Program in this budget. That, again, is rent subsidies so that folks who are low income pay no more than 30% of their annual income. And this is a bill that has been worked on for several years that I'm sure Assemblymember Epstein will also discuss later. So I'm going to stop here. Happy to take questions. We're also fighting in the district around NYU Langone, ensuring that, in response to Trump's executive orders, we're continuing care for some of our most vulnerable youth. And we're also in the district ensuring that we are supporting our nonprofits and community-based organizations that are being responsive. And I'll end there. Susan, am I within my 5-minute time
No,
frame?
but you're just over by a little bit, so I will not get out the whipping with you.
Okay, well, thank you
We'll
so
wait
much.
until the end to take questions. I just want to say that it's really heartening the way the states are stepping up to try to put some of the funding shortfall uh, in the back burner. It's really frightening what's going on. So thank you for your work.
Thank you so much. And I'll stay on till the end. Yeah.
Okay. So Keith, um,
Hello.
yes, go ahead.
Nice to see everyone. Hello, hello, everyone. Thank you as always for being with us, and nice to see all my neighbors here. I'm going to touch on, I think, on two topics. One is the war on scaffolding, which Stuytown is now part of, with scaffolding all throughout our neighborhoods and our neighborhood, and a little bit about the housing lottery, because I know there's been a number of questions about the housing lottery. Just to start on the sorry. Start with the scaffolding. Many of us I know have walked out our doors and started to see more of it. And I'm grateful because Susan Ann and I and others, I think was last year or so, had to do a whole walk around of the area around Playground 5 in Stuytown, where it was just unsafe, no signage, bad lighting, bad visibility. So I had pushed, and thank you to the Tennis Association for pushing management to it was actually more than a year ago now to just do way better when they're putting it up in the first place. But we can see it all throughout our city right now, and it creates really unsafe parts of our city. For those in our small business community, it buries them underneath it. Very hard to operate a business with foot traffic when you have it going up. And for a lot of the property owners and smaller building owners here in the city, it's a tremendous expense. So I have very good news, which is yesterday we passed a package of bills I've been working on through our Borough President Mark Levine to put way less scaffolding up and get it down faster, to make sure that in specific instances like Stuyvesant, that they do not have to cover our entire neighborhood in scaffolding when they have to do facade repairs, which is the current rules. And then when they do put it up, they have to put very bright lighting underneath it. They can make it higher so we have a little more space to see and to look around. And that they can actually even use different colors than that hunter green that seems to be a permanent fixture in our city. We're going to change some of the timelines so that where the most unsafe buildings still have to adhere to pretty tight timelines, but buildings that are newer, buildings that are safe, can go on a different inspection cycle. And the big thing, and maybe it affects us a little bit less than other buildings in the city, when they go up, it's got to get down. No more leaving it up for a decade because building owners don't want to do the work. They don't want to take the scaffolding down or they're delayed. So our package of bills actually does all of that and is actually the first major upgrade since 1998 to those laws that we commonly know as Local Law 11. We actually were joined by the sister of the woman who originally was the impetus for these laws back in the 70s, and she was amazing to join us and really talked about how we have to do the safety measures while also making sure we make sure it's nice and it doesn't become a permanent fixture of our area. But the good news, there's one piece in it that didn't get a lot of attention, but it's 4 campuses, right? I call it like areas like Stuyvesant Town that have this big open setting. The rules today really mean that you have to put a lot of it up to cover even 40 feet away from where at sometimes where the building is. So we're getting into the weeds on that to make sure we make it a lot less necessary for areas that aren't covered by the repairs, which is like really, really good news for us and other areas that are similarly situated to us. So you can read a lot of news about it. We've emailed about it. Happy to send some more information about it. But a little bit of relief, what I call on the war on scaffolding, we have begun to win here in New York City, which is good news. We've gotten a lot of questions about the housing lottery system and how it works. And I think for many folks who are recipients of that, just to give some context on that, as many people remember, when Blackstone first originally bought Stuyvesant Town, there was a regulatory agreement that was put into place with my predecessor, and that helped negotiate the purchase of in 2015. And part of that requires Blackstone to report annually to the city on the number of affordable housing units to ensure that at least 5,000 are maintained. And I believe we are just a little bit over that number today as of last year. But we have still been receiving a lot of questions from people about exactly the parts of it. So one question I think we've received is just what is the status of lotteries and why haven't there been any since 2021? So we have talked to Beam and Blackstone about that, and essentially the lotteries weren't planned for the future because there's still a major wait list from 2021, and I think over 25,000 applicants in the 2021 lottery. So if there were to pull people, they'd be still pulling from that list of people that applied and received a number back in 2021. One of the questions that we got was about increases to housing lotteries. So they are lottery tenants receive rent increases, I believe, on the Rent Guidelines Board, not the AMI that defines the income eligibility, but the AM range will still raise annually for tenants. And if you have questions about it, you can reach out to me or my office. Ben from my office has been working with on this. We can reach out to us to get more information about that. How are units placed into lottery? They became all units that became vacant under the 2020 lottery thresholds get placed into the lottery. $2,000 for a 1-bedroom, $2,600 for a 2-bedroom, and $2,950 for a 3-bedroom. And units, I think, above these thresholds are put onto the website, I think the way I understand it. There is a subleasing process for lottery tenants, but I believe the subletting tenants still need to be qualified based on income. That was a question we received about whether you can sublet it or not. And the answer we received is yes, but you still must be doing it to someone who is eligible under the conditions of the rent regulatory agreement. And how do they differ from the traditional rent stabilized leases that many tenants here have in the city? I believe the leases are identical, and there may be some difference about how you acquire the apartment, how you get into the apartment, what the thresholds are. But remember, there are the traditional rent stabilized tenants that I don't know what we call them these days, but the sort of old, under the 1970s law, not old, young rent stay. Actually, I'm giving me a shade. They're very young people, but longer term apartments that are a little bit different how you fill those and occupy those, but the leases should be identical and so forth. I know there's a lot of questions about this, and it's very nuanced, and not everyone this applies to, but you can reach out to us at 212-818-0580 or email us off our website if you want to get into the question specifically. We can always bring your question to the management and try to get an answer on it and bring it back. But again, always thank you to the Tenants Association for putting us in a place where we can answer these questions and to attend to the many, many different needs and constituencies within the neighborhood, and always proud to be represented by the best Tenants Association in New York City.
Thank you very much, Keith, and thank you for clarifying the word old.
Old but young.
Right. Okay, next we have, I know that many of you are interested, have asked about, is there going to be a rent freeze? And it's top of mind for a lot of people. Anne Greenberg has been very much in the weeds on this. She's been involved for quite some time with tenant coalitions that have mounted this rent freeze campaign. And so I'm going to let her tell you about it.
Thanks, Susan. So for the past 3 years, you've probably noticed that your lease renewal offered significant increases. And in fact, rent increases have amounted to 9% in that time. That's more than in the previous 8 years. But an increase is not inevitable. So tenants around the city are organizing to ask all candidates running for mayor to commit to a rent freeze. 70% of the city rents, and New York has more than 1 million rent-stabilized apartments, including all of us. And if we get together, we are a formidable voting bloc that candidates can't ignore, even as real estate makes huge contributions to political campaigns. So what can each of us do? An offshoot of a major coalition, it's called the New York State Tenant Bloc, BLOC, has a petition that you can sign calling on the mayoral candidates to pledge a rent freeze. So far, 7,000 people have signed the petition and 3 candidates have pledged. So how do rent increases get set? I know there's some perhaps not awareness or confusion about this. The city has a rent guidelines board, but the board doesn't have to raise the rent. It can freeze the rent as it did a few years ago. It could even roll it back. The board has 9 members, 2 represent owners, 2 represent tenants, and 5, including the chair, ostensibly independent and representing the public. But usually the 5 public members vote as a block and tenants lose. But are the public members really voting independently? Mayors usually say they appoint the board but don't influence it. The reality is that mayors have a way of making their wishes known and the public members vote accordingly. Increases hurt all of us. Since they are a percentage of the rent, the dollar amount can be significant for a rent that's already high. In case you're thinking, don't owners need increases to keep up their properties? Consider this from Tim Collins' 2022 testimony to the Rent Guidelines Board. Quote, had the board authorized cumulative rent increases of 181.7% over the 31-year period since 1990, owners would have been kept whole for both operating cost increases and the effect of inflation on net incomes. In fact, the board authorized rent increases of 213.91% over this period. And while rent guidelines have been lower over the past 7 years, back from 2022, they have failed to fully ameliorate excesses accumulated from prior years. So are you ready to sign a petition for a rent freeze? 7,000 New Yorkers, as I said, have already signed. We're going to follow up with an e-blast with the link to the petition and more information. This year's RGB report just came out, and it shows a nice juicy increase in net operating income, which is what's left after operating costs, especially in core Manhattan. So vote like a tenant. And if you can manage it, you get a screenshot of that QR code and it'll take you right to that petition. Thanks, Susan.
Thank you, Anne. And we had a question, correct me if I'm wrong in my answer, but somebody said, how long would a rent freeze last? And as far as I know, it only lasts until the next RGB votes for another increase or another freeze.
Well,
is that right?
Jim may be better placed to answer that, but but they only kind of do 1-2 years at a time. I would just let people know that I think Berlin not so long ago enacted a 4-year rent freeze. So there are other places around the world that are confronting similar situations and coming up with good solutions for renters.
Okay, thank you very much. So, okay, Tim Collins, our attorney, the star of our show here, please take it away. And people are, they're concerned about the state of play of rent stabilization generally, and whether in fact they are safe. And you will clarify the issue for them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Susan. Always good to be back. My retainer agreement from some 12 years ago says I promise to do at least 1 presentation per year to the entire TA without charge. So I'm afraid I'm going to be stuck doing this probably for the next, until I'm 110 or so, and hopefully still on Social Security. So let me I'm going to talk about a number of things. A quick recap of where our cases are. We have a number of major capital improvement increase challenges and related challenges. I'm going to talk just a bit about succession rights because that seems to be a topic on a number of people's minds. And then I'm going to answer some, various questions that have come up in the past and just kind of present a few comments on each of them. With respect to what the Rent Guidelines Board does and how its orders are implemented, whatever the board adopts this spring, which will be filed, publicly usually by July 1st, those guidelines will not go into effect until October 1st, and will be the operative guidelines for lease renewals occurring between October 1st of 2025 and September 30th of 2026. So if hopefully a rent freeze is adopted, you could get a 2-year lease with a rent freeze as late as September of 2026, if your lease comes due at that time. So that's basically the way that it works. Let's be optimistic and hope that this board is receptive. Now, I should also mention a couple of things quickly. Owners appear before the board, they're interested in profitability. Tenants appear before the board, they're interested in affordability. The board fundamentally is concerned with sustainability. The board has to be sure that the housing stock remains viable. And the good news is that you can have both sustainability and affordability with a rent freeze or with very low guidelines, or in some cases even a rollback. But here a rent freeze is what folks are looking for. So let me now talk about the cases that are facing the Stuyvesant Town, Peter Cooper Village. We have in the appellate division 2 cases. One is a facade case involving 19 MCIs and 26 buildings. And this has to do with a victory, an appeal by the owners of a victory that we achieved in Supreme Court. And it is scheduled for oral argument before the appellate division for the June 2025 term. We're still waiting for the owner and DHCR to submit their replies. So I'll probably be arguing that in the appellate division. It is an important case. The victory that we achieved on depreciability, which is basically that you can have no MCI increase unless it's also depreciable under the Internal Revenue Code, was a major victory that we've been angling for a very, very long time. And thanks to the support of the TA, we were able to secure that win, and hopefully we will hold on to it through the appeal. There's also, excuse me, 10 MCIs in 10 buildings involving intercoms. And it has to do with sort of an arcane issue about the useful life and whether it applies when there's no prior MCI. So the appeal on that, it will be filed by July 2025 and will probably be argued in the September 2025 term. At the Supreme Court level, we have some gas piping MCIs for 610 and 620 East 20th Street. These have to do with commercial space allocation, where we think there was a wrongful breakdown between the residential and the commercial use in a way that favors larger increases for the owner. It has to do with a reasonable cost schedule. And as most of you, I think, know by now, we won a significant victory on the reasonable cost issue, sending the regulations back to the DHCR for revision. And it also has to do with our objections to the fact that tenants were not allowed to participate in inspections of this work when DHCR came in to inspect. That argument, again, before the Supreme Court has been fully submitted and argued, and we're awaiting a decision. At the DHCR, we have a number of cases, gas piping for 19-21 Stuyvesant Oval, and we're raising various objections to that MCI. We also have petitions for administrative review. That is, they've already been decided by the rent administrator. We've gone up to the next level in the administrative process. Gas piping at 245 Avenue C. We have various objections to that. Gas piping at 350 First Avenue, also various objections to that. That PAR is in process. We have gas piping at 505 and 515 East 14th Street. And there's various objections to that. Gas piping at 505 and 515 East 14th Street. There's an owner PAR in addition to our PAR, where they're seeking greater increases. And we have various objections to that. We have pending major capital improvements that we are going to push back on. Facade work at 4 Peter Cooper Road. Various objections to that. Facade work at 622-628 East 20th, various objections to that. And facade work at 330 First Avenue, 400 and 410 East 20th, and various objections to that. So if anybody needs any specific information about MCIs in their particular building and what the status is, I think it's probably best just to contact the TA. Let's talk for a minute about succession rights. DHCR has a very helpful form. If you Google DHCR succession rights, it's actually, or Google DHCR RA-23.5 form. I'm going to repeat it, RA-23.5 form. This is a notice to owners of family members residing with a named tenant. And the purpose of this form is to, I don't know if you can all see this, the purpose of this form is to, I guess it doesn't work because I'm on a blur. Wait a second, how's that? All right, so you got a shot of it anyway. It's very easy to get online, you can print it out. If you Google that, it'll pop right up and you shouldn't have a problem. It also includes a thorough discussion of what family members' renewal, lease, and eviction protection rights are. You know, for example, if you have somebody who is a family member living in the apartment and who is then away at college or in military service, that doesn't take away from the period of co-primary residence. So there are, you know, a number of exceptions like that in hospital, if you're hospitalized and in treatment. There's also definitions of what family members are. I'm not going to go into all the details because it would take too long. Fundamentally, what you need to establish is that the tenant of record, that is whoever signed the lease, and the potential successor have co-resided in the apartment for a period of at least 2 years as primary residents. That means you have to, you know, be there, hopefully, and not even hopefully, you really need to be living together at least 7 months out of the year. It's technically 183 days, but it's safe to say you have to be there in the apartment at least 7 months out of the year so you can establish that you're both primary residents. Of course, all of the indicia of primary residence should be in place. That is, you know, driver's licenses, motor vehicle registration, voter registration should all be at the apartment for both parties, the tenant of record as well as the successor. And the test of primary residence is an actual physical nexus. And again, there are exceptions to that. There are exceptions for people who, like military service in college. And if your primary residence is ever challenged, there are other types of exceptions. For example, a number of cases arise when people have to leave the city in order to care for an elderly family member, you know, typically a parent who may be living in Florida or somewhere else. And if they're away and they can explain that they were away for that purpose, that should be considered a reasonable exception. And there's a lot of case law on that. So there is a 1 year period of co-residency for situations where the potential successor is a senior citizen or a disabled person. So the 2 year requirement is shortened to 1 year for senior citizens and disabled persons seeking to succeed the tenant of record. Now, I should also mention the treatment of spouses is distinct from succession. A spouse, if you're a legal spouse in New York State, you have a right to be added to the lease. And typically that occurs on renewal. If you get your renewal lease and you're the tenant of record, let's say that your name is Mary and you have a spouse whose name is, you know, John or Brenda, whatever your spouse's name is, and you have a marriage license, you can insist on renewal that your spouse be added to the renewal lease. You can insist mid-lease as well, and that is in order to secure succession. Now, I mentioned earlier this form 23.5. The reason why I mentioned that form is, and it's not necessarily in the case of a spouse, but you can shift the burden to force the landlord to prove that the person wasn't living there if you file this notice to owner of the family members residing with the apartment in the apartment. So you want to do that for all of the potential successors as early on as you can. gives the landlord notice that your son, daughter, or whomever is a eligible family member is living in the apartment, entitled to succession, and if you end up leaving as the tenant of record and the successor asserts succession rights, they can point to the filing of this form, and they should keep a copy of it, send it certified, keep a copy of proof of mailing, they can point to the filing of this form with the owner as a basis for shifting the burden of proof to the owner to show that in fact this was not a lawful succession situation. Susan, I'm looking for my clock. I know I have a number of other issues to go through. Okay, all right, good. Okay, all right, some questions come up with regard to preferential rents versus actual rents and market rents. I'm only going to discuss that briefly. A preferential rent is a rent that is lower than the legal regulated rent that the owner charges you. Since 2019, with the passage of the HSTPA, if you have a preferential rent, you're entitled to lease renewals based upon that lower figure below the legal regulated rent. So if the Rent Guidelines Board adopts a 2% increase, then that preferential rent goes up only 2%. The legal regulated rent may go up, but you're only going to pay the preferential rent. Preferential rent is the amount that you pay, and you're entitled to continue the preferential rent into future leases. But the preferential rent will disappear when you leave the apartment. There's a full vacancy and a new tenant takes occupancy. Let's see, succession. And as I don't want to get into anything that is too arcane. There's one question about, having two apartments with a couple. If you have two apartments and they're co-occupied, then at least in theory, the successor would have a right to both apartments if they're considered operating as one apartment. It's always going to be challenged, and it would be very fact specific. Now, there's another thing that's come up, which is about lottery apartments, and I believe some other apartments. With the renewals, you're getting a rider that states that rent stabilization will end. In the case of lottery apartments, end in 2035. In the case of other apartments, it basically says that if the law changes, then you will lose your rent stabilization status. Let me be very clear and categorical. Your protections under the state and city rent laws are statutory. Doesn't matter what you sign, you cannot waive your rights under rent stabilization. So to the extent that you have a right to continued stabilization coverage, that right will not be extinguished by your signing one of these riders. Now, we've had a skirmish with management about, the wording of these riders. We think they were misleading. I think that they were somewhat inappropriate. And we really didn't accomplish a whole lot by that. But I can tell you that the riders, to the extent they may depart from legal requirements, are unenforceable. So you should not be losing sleep over them. In order to keep things simple, it's probably not worth us bringing any kind of special challenge on the form of it. So you can sign these things, and they will only be enforceable to the extent that the law is in sync with what the rider is requiring. Now, an issue has come up with respect to for the lottery tenants, will rent stabilization end in 2035? It's my position, and I've advised the legal committee and the board that the rent stabilization law, which was reformed in 2019, really supersedes any other arrangements that would lead to deregulation. I do anticipate there'll probably be some kind of skirmish about that position in the future. It's 10 years away. I don't think anyone should be losing sleep over it. I think everyone will be safe in the long run, but we're going to monitor the situation. And as that time period gets closer, if any action needs to be taken in order to clarify rights, we will do so. And I think the legal committee is committed to watching that closely. But again, I believe that the 2019 law would supersede that termination or sunset period. That certainly was the case with the litigation that we brought for all of the Roberts tenants, where everybody was expected to lose their rent stabilized. Everybody subject to the Roberts was expected to lose their stabilized status as of June 30th, 2020, and that was thrown out. And the owners did not appeal it, or they filed an appeal, but they withdrew their appeal. So we seem to be pretty well locked in. Could there be future legal developments? There can always be future legal developments. But again, I think you're in pretty good shape, and I would not be losing sleep over a potential loss of that victory, because it's a lock and the appeal was abandoned. And occasionally questions come up as well, because there was a flurry of challenges to rent stabilization in general a few years ago. All of those challenges were knocked down. Let me be clear about the security of rent stabilization as a function of the state's power to protect the public health and welfare. It's called the state police power. The limits of that power, or the reach of that power, were very clearly established over 100 years ago, and were amplified and clarified in the context of rent regulation back in the 1920s and again through the 1930s, and in a period of cases, in a variety of cases following. If the U.S. Supreme Court ever pulls the rug out from the state power to protect tenants against excessive rents and evictions, it would not simply be a change of precedent, but it would be a revolution. It would be an attack on the fundamental ability of states to protect people from exploitive, what we used to call rent gouging, exploitive practices. And the reality is that in a market like the city of New York, there is nothing normal. Owners of real estate in a variety of different contexts have a great deal of ability to exercise arbitrary power, to extract economic advantages over tenants that don't exist in normal markets. So if the state is ever deprived of its ability to address that and protect tenants, both in terms of rents and evictions, that would be just a fundamental attack on an alignment of what we think our democratic society is about and our civilization is about, that has been in place for over a century. So I do not anticipate it. Even with this very conservative Supreme Court, I do not anticipate that there will be an undermining of rent and eviction protections. If it happens, it will happen at a political level, most likely at a state level, if there is a swing in New York to a conservative control of the state legislature and state senate. I don't see that happening in the near future. New York, fortunately, is well within the ballpark of civil society, and I hope we will stay there for some time to come, notwithstanding the stuff that's going on around us, which seems to shroud everything else in darkness. But I think we're going to be okay, and I think rent regulation will be around for a long time to come.
Tim, I want to thank you very much, and I'm sure there are several people out there that have taken a deep breath and will sleep better tonight. A couple of quick questions, and then I'm going to ask some questions that Kristen and Keith can respond to. We got a question from a lottery tenant who wants to know if succession rights are applicable to lottery tenants.
Succession rights are applicable to everybody. Succession rights are, if you are rent stabilized, and lottery tenants are rent stabilized, succession rights are part of the package of rent protections and cannot be waived.
The other thing is that we've gotten a few questions about tenants who want to add their children to the lease, and I don't think they realize that only a husband or a wife can be added to the lease. So you may need to clarify.
Yeah, that question comes up quite a bit. You can't add somebody to the lease who is not a spouse. Like I said, you can certainly add a spouse. It doesn't really matter, though, because other family members, and again, there's a list on the RA 23.5 form, but perhaps it's worth mentioning who that group is, let's see, spouse, son, daughter, stepson, stepdaughter, father, mother, stepfather, stepmother, brother, sister, grandfather, grandmother, grandson, granddaughter, father-in-law, mother-in-law, son-in-law, or daughter-in-law. So any one of those people are potential successors. And in the case of a spouse, you don't really even need to be a successor because, as I said, you could be added to the lease. But all of the others in those groups, as potential successors, don't really need to be added to the lease. But what you do have to be mindful of is they have to have co-occupancy as primary residence with a tenant of record for the time periods that we talked about. 2 years for most, 1 year in the case that the successor is either a senior citizen or disabled.
All right, thank you very much. We've gotten some questions about scree and dree, so I don't know, Keith and Kristen, you can duke it out as to who wants to answer them. But, of course, tenants are interested in knowing whether the income limit is ever going to expand.
Well, I hope so. I just drafted a letter with a bunch of colleagues to call on that because it's been, I think, now since 2014 since there was an expansion of the limits, or the thing that used to be in the 20,000 range. Now they're up to, I think, 50,000 or so. So as rents climb and things get costlier in the city, to me, it's a good time to update the DRE and SCRE income levels. That's ultimately does reside in Albany, and I know our folks certainly support that. But I drafted a letter with Gail Brewer and other members of the council calling for Albany to think about it. Well, hopefully take that up as part of the budget process or later on this year. So something I am certainly advocating for and would love to see happen.
I know that you've had a number of scree events here in Stuyvesant Town. I understand we're still underrepresented.
You mean in terms of how many people are signed up versus how many should be?
Yes.
Yes, we get the list and we'll host sign-up events. In the past, we've called people if they're not renewing to make sure people don't miss it. But we do and often do find that there are people who are not always signing up or re-signing or whatever else might be. We'll always, try to do more of those events so it's easy and accessible for people because it's a really important program. I can't speak to exactly why folks are doing that or not doing that, but certainly they should take advantage of it.
Thank you. Now here's another question. Where, speaking of the scaffolding and the work, the building pointing and all of that, the question comes up from time to time about the warranty of habitability. And, I'm not so sure that it has any real teeth, but there's noise, the noise issues. I know it's a quality of life, and I promised we wouldn't be asking it, but the noise is such a big deal here. And, is that warranty of habitability of any use when it comes to noise?
It's a tricky. Well, also I should note, I think somebody where Epstein is trying to get in and onto the panel. So if somebody could let him in, he just texted me and I realized. Look, it's one of the toughest issues. I don't know exactly maybe Tim or somebody would have a clear legal answer to this, but it's certainly one of the biggest issues and the hardest issues we get as a complaint. I think all of us have experienced some level of noise, whether it's on your floor or your neighbors, and it's a very, very tricky issue. I'm, not crystal clear in the legal answer to that, but I certainly something we get a lot of calls about. We try to help with management to see if there's a way to mediate it and have the polite way to start as navigating it, and then they will escalate to notices and potentially further penalties. But I do not think I've seen it super applied here, but I will I'll leave it to others maybe to answer that question as well, Tim or others.
Okay. Here we go. We were having trouble getting our assembly member in, but I think we finally done it. Harvey,
Hi.
we weren't being deliberate about that. We really want you to join.
Thank you, Susan. I was trying to get in, but thank you, Sandra, for letting me in. I appreciate it. Can I just say one thing about the screegery thing? Because I know Keith has raised
Yeah.
that. So we are not going, without the city's approval, we're not going to be able to increase the threshold. We've been trying internally. We have bills pending on this. So the more we can do to get them, put pressure on the mayor's office to support the increase in the screegery. We've had a bill the entire time I've been in the assembly to increase the threshold beyond the $50,000, and they're just not willing. So anything that the tenant association here can do to put pressure on them to increase it and then index it to inflation, because it comes out of the city's real estate taxes, so the state won't do it without the city's approval. So that's really a big piece of what we need to get done this year, if we can get that threshold increased. If the city won't say yes, we will not do it. So whatever pressure we can put on the mayor this year will be really helpful. And Keith, thank you for the correspondence. And I think obviously the council's in great shape, but the mayor's office is really where we need to push.
Yep, thanks.
Susan, you're muted, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you for the additional information on scree and DRE. And I think you want to talk a little bit about, update the community on Mount Sinai Beth Israel, and also talk about what's going on in the New York State Housing Committee.
Yeah, sure. And then I don't know how much people have been paying attention in the last couple of weeks about Mount Sinai, Beth Israel. Well, about last summer, the governor approved, really with our opposition, the closing at Mount Sinai Beth Israel over the summer in July, and then the community coalition got a stay of that closure, got a temporary restraining order. Unfortunately, the judge in state Supreme Court dismissed the case just now a couple weeks ago, but the appellate court reinstated that stay, and so right now there's a stay of closing. So we're waiting for the appellate court to decide what to do. But what happened between the closing, the approval of the closing in the court case and the appellate stay was they emptied out basically the hospital. So really, Mount Sinai Beth Israel is now a shell of itself. They've committed to a 24-hour, urgent care center that'll be open right out of New York Ioneer site. We'll see what happens if that ever opens. But at this point, they're still open as an emergency department, but there's a real risk going forward of whether we're going to see this closing in the near future. If we can just take a minute talking about the state budget, Chris, I don't know how much you talked about this, and I apologize, but I think we're in the last throes of the state budget. We are. It'll be late probably next week. It's due on the 1st, and it's likely to be late. And there are a lot of things that are pending that we're trying to figure out. And I think that everyone acknowledges that we have a serious mental health crisis in our city, and the real question is how to fix it. And we've been really pushing for more supportive housing units to get more beds. We've seen this problem where people do not have supportive housing and they're living on the streets. We see people who are not taking care of themselves, not getting enough mental health support. And then we just really need to have real long-term fixes. I think we're going to change the rules around involuntary commitment, but that just means someone's going to be hospitalized. Even though we don't have enough hospital beds, we need to increase more beds, but then they just come back out to the streets. We need really longer term solutions. There's places, bills like Daniel's Law we're trying to get done, increasing, the supportive housing beds are really, really important fixes to the problem. So if people in the next 2 weeks, I think it's going to take at least 2 weeks, putting pressure on the governor to kind of move forward with some of the things we're pushing in the legislature to fix the things that need to be fixed to ensure that we can deal with the mental health crisis. If we don't have enough beds, we're never going to fix this problem. If we don't have enough housing, we're never going to fix this problem. And we're just going to have 3,000 homeless people with serious mental health issues. And some of them are going to be like Ramon Rivera, who was arrested, went to Rikers, released from Rikers, given a discharge plan, which resulted in not showing up for his therapy and then unfortunately stabbing and killing 3 New Yorkers. We can't allow another Ramon Rivera without a real plan for discharge. And those are things we're trying to get done right now in the budget.
Okay. Well, anybody who has experienced the homeless illegal vendors on 14th Street understands the dangers inherent in not taking appropriate care of people who need it.
Yeah, and I have to say that I want with Keith's credit, and I'm sorry I'm keeping talking, but we created this interagency task force, work with the mayor's office, and then we were able to kind of bring all these agencies together and to deal with the 14th Street problem, and required concerted effort. And Keith and Carlina and Kristen and myself were really active in that effort. So if we continue to do things like that, we can get in front of the problem instead of waiting it got too bad, and it got really bad, and resulted in those stabbings. But we can avoid that going forward, and we can be proactive to make sure these interagency task forces are working. And that's going to get in front of the problem, and then we can have long-term solutions for long-term problems.
Well, I have to say that the mayor promised us $1 million command car, and we're still waiting on it.
Yeah, and we keep asking, and we're being told that it's in the process. The mayor may no longer be here before when we at the time when we want our car.
Kristen, do you want to say anything? We're getting on to 8 o'clock, and I thought maybe you'd like to make some comments.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I definitely agree with Assemblymember Epstein. I think the roundtables we had on 14th Street were really successful, and then the walkthroughs. I think we've seen an improvement, but again, just want to re-up that anyone is welcome to reach out to our offices, report anything that you're seeing. Feel free to send us pictures. We're monitoring the situation. As far as Mount Sinai Beth Israel goes, I know I'd mentioned some of the legislation around it that we're trying to push with the budget, but we're working closely with them on a communications plan. And what we got them to, in addition to the 24-hour urgent care, is also to step up in this process and engage the community. So they will be, we're requiring them to send out mail on this, to have information on different languages so folks know that this urgent care is available and know what the transition looks like, and they are transparent, or as transparent as possible. So please, keep an eye out as we go, await the decision from the courts, but our offices will be communicating a lot of this out, and they certainly will and should be doing the same. Yeah, I think I went through a lot of budget priorities. I think that's everything on our end. Obviously there's an executive order every day. Recently, one of them was on elections. As chair of that committee, we actually passed an entire package of bills on voter registration, voter transparency, and then increasing access to the polls on the first day of our legislative session. So just also I think that's one of the bigger news stories that happened within the last day or so. So also want to let folks know that, we're being responsive in the legislature, even to the things that are not through the budget, but that are certainly a threat to our democracy.
Yes, our democracy. May it live long. Anyway, It is now 8 o'clock. We promised people that we would keep it to an hour. It's gone by very quickly. I do hope that you have noted had gotten the information that you were seeking, but as I said, questions that have not been answered can be put together, responses can be put together and emailed to the participants who have registered. I thank you all very much for your attention and your time, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you and good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone.